In a quiet hospital in the small town of Edenbridge, a little girl with brown skin and fierce eyes clutches her mother's hand, refusing to let go. Her mother lies silent after a tragic accident, and the world has become cold, expensive, and unfair. When the child hears the nurse whispering about unpaid bills, she makes a choice no 6-year-old should have to make: save her family alone. What follows is a journey across the color line drawn in silence and cruelty, where a children's song illuminates a long-buried truth. She enters a music competition unaware that her father is there too. One of the judges, a man who once lost everything for love that crossed the color line. From whispering folktales of dignity to modern truths about race and belonging, this is more than just a story of coming together. It's about what it takes to be seen in a world that often turns its eyes away. Don't miss this powerful story about courage, identity, and the healing power of truth. Watch now and let this story remind you of the true meaning of family. At St. Matthew Hospital in the quiet town of Edenbridge, the sterile hum of machines filled the dim room where a woman lay unconscious. Her name was Pearl. Her pale skin, once flushed with life, now looked almost translucent under the soft flicker of fluorescent light. Bandages wrapped around her arms and forehead, her chest rising and falling with the assistance of a ventilator that beeped with an unsettling rhythm. In the corner of the room sat a little girl, no older than 6, barely reaching the height of the chair she clung to. Her name was Abigail. Her skin was a warm caramel, her hair a crown of tight coils that framed her face with a silent defiance. Her eyes, wide and glassy, never left her mother's face. One of her small hands held Pearl's, the other tucked into her lap. Every so often she whispered something so soft only her mother could have heard it if she were awake. "Mommy, please wake up. I'm right here. I need you. Please." The door creaked gently, and in walked Gloria Watkins, a woman in her mid-60s with tired eyes and kind hands. She wore a thick coat despite the heated hallways and carried a small thermos and a paper bag. She was the landlady of the modest apartment where Pearl and Abigail had stayed for the past year, and more importantly, the only adult in Edenbridge who truly saw Abigail as more than a burden or curiosity. Gloria's voice was careful, like someone speaking through grief of her own. "Baby, you should eat something. You can't take care of your mama if you don't take care of yourself." Abigail didn't look away. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "She needs me." Gloria moved closer, placed the bag on the table, and sat across from the little girl. "She would want you to eat. You know that." Abigail shook her head slowly. "She needs me more." For a while, neither of them spoke. The machines did all the talking. The air felt heavy, like every second stretched twice as long as it should. Finally, Gloria reached over and gently touched Abigail's shoulder. "I called the hospital's social worker. They'll help with the bills. Don't worry too much about the grown-up stuff." But Abigail had overheard things. Earlier that morning, behind the thin curtain, just outside the ICU, 2 nurses had whispered when they thought no one was listening. "They don't have insurance," one said. "That mother's been in and out of jobs. It's going to cost a fortune just to keep her here another week." Abigail didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to feel the pressure of a grown-up world closing in around her. It wasn't fair. Nothing about this was fair. Later that evening, when Gloria had dozed off in the corner chair, Abigail stood by the window watching cars pass by beneath the hospital's faint glow. Her breath fogged up the glass. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't sad, but because she felt like if she started, she might never stop. What she did instead was think. Think of ways to fix what felt unfixable. The next morning, back at Gloria's house, while folding her school sweater and laying it across the edge of the couch, Abigail asked in a quiet voice, "Miss Gloria, how do people make money really fast?" The question landed like a stone in Gloria's stomach. "Why are you asking something like that? I heard the nurses talking," Abigail replied. "They said we don't have money. If I can help, I want to." Gloria stared at her, trying to find the right thing to say to a child who'd already heard too much. "You shouldn't be worrying about that, sweetheart. That's not for kids to carry." "But I'm not a kid right now," Abigail insisted, her small hands clenched. "Not if Mommy's not okay?" There was a long pause before Gloria exhaled. "Well, there is something. There's a singing contest next month in Roseville. Horizon Studios hosts it every year. Big place, real serious about talent. They give away prize money. Lots of it." Abigail blinked. "Singing? You've got a good voice. I've heard you humming in the kitchen." Gloria smiled gently, but it didn't last long. "But it's a long shot, baby. Lots of older kids fancy training, probably from families with more time and help than you've got." Abigail didn't reply. She just sat on the edge of the couch, staring out the window again. But this time, something shifted. Her hands no longer trembled. Her spine straightened. There was no magic moment, no dramatic music swelling in the background. Just a girl, quiet and determined, deciding that she would do what she could because she had to. That night, she sat with a notebook in her lap and wrote down the lyrics to the song she'd heard her mom sing late at night, back when things were better. It was a lullaby one Pearl had written herself, soft and full of hope. She changed some words, made it her own. Her handwriting was messy, her spelling not perfect, but the feeling behind each line was real. The next morning, Abigail woke early. She ate breakfast, combed her hair as best as she could, and asked Gloria if she could help her sign up. She was scared. Her chest felt tight, her throat dry, but she was also sure, more sure than she had ever been of anything in her short life. The process wasn't easy. The form was complicated. The rules were intimidating. Contestants must be accompanied by a parent or legal guardian. Gloria hesitated. "They might not let you in unless I come with you." Abigail nodded. "Then will you be my guardian? Just for the contest." Gloria stared at her for a long time. "Child, I've got no right to speak for your mother, but I'll be there. You won't walk in alone." As the days passed, Abigail practiced in the back room of Gloria's home. Her voice wasn't big, but it was clear. It wasn't polished, but it had heart. Some evenings, Gloria would sit outside the door and listen. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she cried. One afternoon after practice, Abigail asked softly, "Miss Gloria, do people not like me because I don't look like other girls?" Gloria didn't answer right away. She walked over, knelt down, and tucked a coil of hair behind the girl's ear. "Some people don't understand what they can't name. They see your skin, your hair, and they make up stories in their heads about who you are. But that's their problem, not yours." Abigail nodded slowly. She didn't fully understand, but she understood enough. By the end of the week, she stood in front of a mirror wearing the dress Gloria had sewn from leftover fabric, simple, neat, and blue, like the sky on good days. She stared at her reflection, not with pride exactly, but with purpose. Her mother was still in that hospital bed. The bills hadn't gone away. The future was still a mess. But Abigail had a plan now. A small plan. A hopeful plan. She whispered to herself just once, "I'm gonna help Mommy. I'm going to win." And just like that, the first steps of a long journey had begun, not in a stadium, not on a grand stage, but in the quiet determination of a little girl who believed love could fight against fear. And that belief, no matter how small, was enough to carry her forward. The drive to Roseville was longer than Abigail expected. From the back seat of Gloria's old sedan, she watched the changing scenery through a slightly smudged window fields fading into city blocks, quiet country roads giving way to traffic lights and busy sidewalks. It was her first time leaving Edenbridge, and although she didn't say much, the nervous tapping of her fingers on her thighs said enough. She clutched her small notebook to her chest, the one filled with lyrics she had written and rewritten every night. It wasn't perfect. Nothing felt perfect, but it was hers. She had no fancy dress, no vocal coach, no parent beside her who could stand tall and say, "This is my daughter." But Gloria had promised to be there, and that was enough for now. At Horizon Studios, the lobby was wide and echoey with polished floors and bright lighting that made everything feel a little too exposed. Children in pristine outfits sat beside parents who looked just as polished. Some were warming up their voices, others filming TikToks or reviewing notes with managers. Abigail clung to Gloria's hand, her eyes darting between the bright banners and the registration table. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset stood at the desk, checking names against a list. When it was their turn, Gloria leaned down and gave Abigail a small nudge. "Go ahead, baby. Tell her your name." Abigail's voice barely rose above the hum of the room. "Abigail Cole." The woman looked down the list. "Do you have a parent or guardian present?" Gloria stepped forward. "I'm here with her. I'm her temporary guardian." The woman hesitated for a second, glanced at Abigail, then back at Gloria, then handed them a paper tag. "Room B16. You're in the third batch. Wait there until they call your group." Abigail nodded and took the pass with both hands. Her palms were already sweating. In room B16, rows of folding chairs were lined up facing a small temporary stage. A camera crew moved between chairs, checking angles, testing lights. Other contestants sat quietly or scrolled on phones. Abigail sat in the second row, hands resting in her lap, her feet not quite touching the floor. Her throat was dry. Her stomach twisted every time the door opened and someone new walked in. Behind her, Gloria sat quietly with a book open on her lap, though her eyes rarely looked at the pages. When the announcer stepped in and called the next group to line up backstage, Abigail stood, her knees wobbling. She looked at Gloria. "Do I have to go alone?" Gloria touched her shoulder gently. "I'll be right here when you come back. You know your song. You've got this." Abigail nodded, clutching the notebook tighter, and walked toward the stage entrance, where a production assistant guided her to a mark on the floor. From the shadows, she could see the main performance room larger than she imagined, with soft blue lights, a wide circular stage, and a panel of judges seated at a long table. She had seen this room on television once when her mom watched a music show, but seeing it in person made her feel as small as a pebble. She took a deep breath and tried to push her fear down to where it couldn't shake her voice. Across the room, seated third from the left on the judging panel, was Zane Cole. He had been skimming performance notes, flipping through contestant bios that blurred together after the 50th name. His headphones hung around his neck, his coffee now cold. He'd sat through nearly 20 performances, and only one or two had sparked his interest. His thoughts drifted to other things: meetings, deadlines, his next tour, his sister's birthday next week, until a name flashed across the monitor: Abigail Cole. He stopped. That last name, it wasn't uncommon, but something about the pairing caught his eye. He looked up just as the small figure stepped into the light. Abigail stood center stage, frozen for a second. The lights made her squint, and she could feel the eyes of strangers judging everything: the curls of her hair, the scuffed shoes, the handmade dress. She exhaled and closed her eyes just long enough to center herself. Then she opened her notebook and held it carefully as she began to sing. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't soar like the voices of older kids who had gone before her. But it was clear, and there was something in it, something vulnerable and real, something that reached out past the microphones and the stage and the judges' table and asked without words to be heard. Zane didn't look down at his notes. He sat forward. The melody was simple, but it tugged at something deep in his chest. The lyrics, he knew them, not exactly, but close. They echoed a song he had written years ago, late at night, in a small studio apartment, his hands on a beat-up keyboard, Pearl beside him, humming melodies that made his world slow down. They never released the song. It was too personal, too unfinished, yet here it was coming from a child's lips, wrapped in slightly new words but carrying the same emotion. He gripped the edge of the table, his heart pounding. Her voice, her eyes, the way she looked so much like someone he used to know, it all came crashing together. He whispered under his breath, "That's not possible." The other judges clapped politely when she finished. A few smiled. The host thanked her and guided her off the stage. Zane didn't clap. He stared at the empty space where she had stood, trying to steady his breath. As the next contestant began setting up, he reached for the tablet in front of him and pulled up her profile again. Abigail Cole, age 6, hometown Edenbridge, accompanied by legal guardian Gloria Watkins. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed back from the table. Zane, one of the producers, called from the side. "You all right, man?" He nodded, but his voice was low. "I need 5 minutes." Outside the audition room, in a quiet hallway lined with vending machines and posters from past seasons of the show, Zane leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Edenbridge. He had been there, years ago. Pearl had grown up near there. The pieces lined up in a way that terrified him. Back in room B16, Abigail sat beside Gloria again. She looked down at her hands and whispered, "Did I mess up?" Gloria shook her head. "You did something real. That's more than most people ever do." Moments later, a crew assistant entered, speaking into a headset. "Is there an Abigail Cole here?" Abigail stood quickly. "Yes, that's me. The judges would like a word." Abigail's heart skipped. "Am I in trouble?" No. It's nothing bad." The assistant smiled. "Just follow me, please." As they walked, Abigail felt every beat of her heart echo in her ears. She glanced behind her. Gloria gave a small thumbs up and mouthed, "You're okay." When she stepped into the small green room adjacent to the main set, she saw him. A man in a dark jacket, clean-cut, intense eyes. He wasn't smiling. He stood when she entered and looked at her like she was made of glass and memory. "Hi, Abigail," he said quietly. "I'm Zane. I saw your performance." She nodded, unsure if she was allowed to speak. I wanted to ask about the song you sang. Did you write that?" Abigail swallowed. "Me and my mom, kind of." It was her song. She used to sing it when she thought I was asleep. Zane sat down slowly as if the weight of that sentence pulled at every bone in his body. His voice cracked a little. What's your mom's name? Pearl. Pearl Elliott. The room went still. Time, sound, breath, everything paused. Zane didn't speak. He just stared. Then finally his voice just above a whisper, I knew her. A long time ago. Abigail tilted her head. You did. He nodded, then smiled gently, a sadness behind his eyes. Yeah, I did. And in that quiet, something passed between them. A thread neither of them could see, but both could feel thin, fragile, but undeniably there. Abigail sat quietly near the edge of the courtyard behind Horizon Studios, where a handful of children played or chatted while waiting for the next round of rehearsals. The sun was gentler now, hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement. She sat on a low bench, her notebook open beside her, though she wasn't writing. Her eyes followed the rhythm of her swinging feet, the shoelaces tapping against each other with each movement. A part of her still glowed with pride from her earlier performance, but that feeling was fragile, balanced precariously between hope and worry. She hadn't seen Zane since their brief meeting. He hadn't promised anything, hadn't revealed much, but something about the way he looked at her stayed with her. There was something familiar in his eyes, not recognition exactly, but a pull, like something unspoken waiting to take shape. A burst of laughter broke her thoughts. 3 boys slightly older dressed in branded jackets and sparkling clean sneakers sauntered across the courtyard. Their names, she would later learn, were Liam, Noah, and Ethan. Their hair was neatly styled, their backpacks monogrammed, and their attitudes carried the entitlement of children raised with few real consequences. They weren't loud at first, just watching, whispering among themselves, but the glances they shot at Abigail weren't friendly. She lowered her eyes, hoping they would walk past. They didn't. Hey, Liam said, stepping a little too close. What are you even doing here? Abigail looked up slowly. I'm waiting for my turn. Noah laughed. You think someone like you is going to win this? She didn't answer. Her heart was already beating faster, her hands curling slightly into fists on her lap. She knew the tone. She'd heard it before in stores and school hallways from kids who said she talked funny or looked different. There were always different ways of saying the same thing. Ethan chimed in. Seriously, though, that song you sang, it was weird. Who sings that kind of stuff? Where'd you even learn it? Some broken-down church. Liam nudged him, grinning. Maybe she made it up, or her mom did. That is, if she even has one. The words stung deeper than she expected. Her face flushed, not just with embarrassment, but with something hotter, an ache that climbed up her chest and sat in her throat. She opened her mouth to say something to tell them to stop, but the words wouldn't come out. They never did at the right moment. From a short distance away, Zane had been heading toward the studio entrance when the tone of the boys' voices caught his attention. It wasn't just the noise. It was the way they clustered, the way Abigail sat still, her body stiff and silent. He paused, eyes narrowing, and listened. You don't even belong here, Liam said, his voice quieter but sharper. This is for real talent, not charity cases. Zane moved without thinking. His steps were firm but controlled, not rushed, not aggressive. As he reached them, the boys didn't notice him right away. Abigail looked up first, eyes wide but unreadable. He stopped a few feet from them, his voice low but clear. That's enough. All 3 boys turned, caught off guard by his presence. Zane looked at each of them in turn, not glaring, not raising his voice, but speaking with a steadiness that made the air feel heavier. Do you talk to every contestant like that, or just the ones who look like her? The silence that followed was louder than anything they'd said. Liam shifted his weight, opened his mouth, but Zane cut him off. You think you're better because you wear nicer clothes because your parents pay for vocal lessons. He took a step closer, not threatening, just grounded. Talent has nothing to do with privilege, and it sure as hell has nothing to do with skin color. The boys didn't reply. Their faces flushed, their bravado shrinking under the weight of being called out by someone they all recognized. Leave her alone, Zane said, his voice final. They turned and walked away without another word. When they were out of earshot, Zane turned to Abigail. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked down again, but he crouched to her level, his tone shifting. Are you all right? She nodded slowly. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, he said softly. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Ever. She was quiet for a second, then asked, why do people hate me when they don't even know me? Zane exhaled, his eyes softening. Because they've been taught to be afraid of anything different. But that's not your burden to carry. You hear me? She nodded, but there was still doubt in her eyes. He wanted to say more, to wrap his arms around her and tell her everything was going to be okay, but the words got stuck behind everything he hadn't said yet. So he settled for reaching out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're strong, stronger than you should have to be. Abigail managed a small smile, though her eyes still shimmered. Zane stood clearing his throat, and in that vulnerable moment, the words slipped out. Let's get you something to drink, sweetheart. You okay with that, my little... He stopped himself. The next word caught mid-breath. He covered quickly. My little star. Abigail tilted her head. What were you going to say? He shook his head with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nothing. Just, let's go. As they walked back toward the building, Gloria watched from a distance. She had seen enough to know what had happened. The way Zane looked at Abigail, the way he instinctively protected her, spoke volumes. She didn't say anything when they approached, only opened her arms as Abigail ran to her. Zane gave her a small nod. Thank you, Gloria said softly. He nodded again, his voice quiet. No child should be made to feel less than, not for any reason. Inside, as the hallway buzzed with activity and announcements, Abigail clung to Gloria's hand tighter than usual. Zane lingered near the door for a moment, then walked away, his mind racing. He had seen his younger self in Abigail's face. The same questions, the same hurt, the same strength, and now more than ever he needed answers. Back in his dressing room, he pulled out an old notebook from the bottom of his bag, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were lyrics, sketches, pieces of songs never finished. On the inside cover was a photo worn at the edges. Pearl, smiling. He stared at it for a long time. His jaw tightened. He had walked away from that part of his life for reasons that felt justified at the time. Fear, shame, anger. But now none of that seemed to matter. There was a little girl with his eyes and her voice who was out there facing the same battles he had once faced alone. He wasn't going to let her fight them by herself. It took Zane several phone calls, a few discreet questions to production staff, and a quiet conversation with Gloria to finally track down the room. He hadn't been sure if Gloria would even speak to him after their brief exchange outside the studio, but when he approached her with sincerity and not a hint of ego, she saw the truth in his eyes. She told him which hospital Pearl had been admitted to, wrote down the room number carefully, and said, "If you're going to see her, don't wait. She needs more than medicine." Now, as Zane stood outside room 14B of St. Matthew Hospital, the hallway was quiet. The kind of quiet that stretched time and made every footstep sound louder than it should. He had passed the nurse's station without making much eye contact, just a soft nod, and the words, "I'm here for Pearl Elliott." They had looked at him for a beat too long before pointing him down the corridor. Maybe they recognized his face. Maybe they saw something else, a man carrying the weight of years in the space between his shoulders. He paused at the door, his hand hovering just above the knob, his breath shallow. He didn't know what he expected to find. He didn't even know if he had the right to be here. But after what happened in the courtyard, after seeing Abigail break under the pressure of words no child should ever hear, he could no longer stay away. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed to see her, Pearl. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting a soft amber glow across the walls. The television was off, the blinds were drawn halfway, and the only sound was the occasional beeping from the heart monitor. Pearl lay still, her skin pale but her breathing steady. Her hair, though disheveled, framed her face gently. For a long moment, Zane just stood there, eyes tracing every feature, memorizing the changes time had etched on her. Then her fingers twitched. Her eyelids moved. Slowly she stirred. He stepped closer. "Pearl," he said, his voice low and hesitant. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then narrowing as they adjusted to the light and the figure before her. For a few seconds, she just looked at him, unsure if she was dreaming. Then came the whisper, barely audible. "Zane." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, it's me." A silence fell between them, not empty, but full. Full of years, full of questions, full of everything they had never said. Pearl blinked slowly, her voice hoarse. "Why are you here?" He sat down at the edge of the chair by her bed, his hands clasped tightly together. "I didn't know until recently. About Abigail, about you being here. I saw her," she sang. Pearl's eyes filled with something he couldn't name, a mixture of fear, guilt, and maybe buried beneath all that hope. "She looks like you." Zane exhaled, sharply nodding. "I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard the song. The one we wrote. She changed it a little, made it hers. But I knew. Pearl looked away, her gaze fixed on a crack in the ceiling. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't. Zane leaned in slightly, his voice more intense. Couldn't or wouldn't. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers fidgeted with the blanket, pulling it tighter around her waist. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They said if I kept seeing you, they'd cut me off. Take her from me. My father. He threatened to have me declared unfit. Said he'd raise her himself without you, without me. He meant it. Zane stared at her, the anger in his chest rising with each word. So, you let them win. Pearl's head turned back toward him sharply. Don't you dare. You think I wanted this. You think I didn't cry every night for months, years, wondering if I did the right thing. You think I didn't feel like a coward walking away from the one person who ever saw me for who I was. Zane looked down, his jaw tight. I thought you left because I wasn't enough. Her voice cracked. I left because I was afraid and alone, and too young to fight a war I didn't understand. My family didn't just disagree with us being together. They hated the idea of you, the color of your skin, the sound of your name. They said loving you would ruin me, and for a long time I believed them. Zane sat back in the chair, his eyes rimmed red, his breath slow and shaky. And now she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Now I know they were wrong, and I was wrong too. But I never stopped loving you, not really, and I never stopped wanting you to know her. He nodded slowly, tears sliding down his cheeks silently. She's special, Pearl. She's got your heart, and she's got this fire in her I can't explain. But she's carrying so much, too much. Pearl closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. I've tried to protect her. From the noise, from the weight of what she is and what the world sees. Zane squeezed her hand. She needs both of us. I want to be there. I should have been there all along, but now, please, let me make it right. Pearl opened her eyes again. I never wanted to keep her from you, but I didn't know how to find you after everything. You were gone. Zane nodded. I was angry. I ran. I buried myself in work, in fame. None of it filled the space you left. She smiled, weak but real. I never cared about the spotlight. I just wanted peace, a safe place for her to grow up. She deserves that. And more, Zane said. Let me help. Pearl looked at him, studied his face. She saw the same man she had loved, changed and weathered, but still there. She nodded. Okay. They sat in silence again, not heavy this time, but calm, restful. For the first time in years, they were breathing the same air, not as strangers shaped by regret, but as two people finally stepping out of the past. Outside the room, the hallway remained quiet, but inside, something was beginning. A healing, a return, a promise not spoken in grand declarations, but in a shared look, a held hand, a future cautiously unfolding in the soft rhythm of a heart monitor, keeping time for two hearts finally speaking again. The days following Pearl's gradual recovery moved slowly, but not quietly. Her strength returned bit by bit, starting with moments of clarity, followed by short walks down the hospital hallway supported by Gloria or a kind nurse. Zane visited often, never pushing too hard, always waiting for Pearl to set the pace. They spoke in fragments, at first slowly stitching together the story of their time apart. Abigail, in the meantime, was a beam of light that seemed to energize everyone around her. Each day after school, she rushed to the hospital room, carrying a new drawing or a joke she had learned sitting on the edge of the bed, chattering nonstop just to keep her mother smiling. What moved everyone most was the way Abigail looked at Zane after he told her the truth. There wasn't a dramatic reaction or sudden embrace. It was quiet, like most real moments between people who are learning to love each other. I'm a bit sorry. She had looked at him for a long time, eyes wide, trying to process it. Then she said softly, I thought you were just someone who liked my song. Zane had knelt to her level, touched her hand, and replied, I liked it because it came from you. From that moment on, Abigail followed him with a kind of cautious trust, curious, eager, and proud. She told everyone who would listen in her soft but clear voice, That's my dad, as if she had just discovered the last missing piece in a picture she had drawn by heart. Word of Abigail's performance had begun to spread far beyond the studio and the local press. Clips of her singing were shared online, tagged, reposted, and passed along with captions like, This little girl sang from her soul, or the voice that brought a judge to tears. But just as quickly as the praise came, so did the questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had Zane Cole, famous, elusive, fiercely private, Zane Cole, been seen speaking to her backstage with eyes that looked far more paternal than professional? The speculation snowballed until it became impossible to contain. And Zane, who had spent much of his career dodging cameras and keeping his personal life off the record, knew it was time to stop hiding. The press conference was his idea. It wasn't orchestrated by a PR team or pushed by a manager. It was simple. One room, one podium, a few selected journalists, and no pre-written statement. Pearl had hesitated. She hated cameras, hated the idea of being scrutinized again. But Zane had taken her hand gently and said, "They're already talking. If we stay silent, they'll write our story without us. I want our daughter to grow up knowing we never hid her. We claimed her proudly even when it was hard." That word claim had settled in Pearl's chest like a stone. All her life she had been told to hide, to play it safe, to never cause a scene. And now, here was the man she had once loved, still loved, standing beside her, not to protect his image, but to protect their daughter's truth. So she agreed. But that didn't mean the anxiety vanished. The room was filled with about 20 reporters, a few photographers, and 2 live stream cameras. Abigail sat in the front row beside Gloria Legg, swinging under her chair, clutching the small wooden bracelet she had made for her mother in the hospital. She didn't fully understand what a press conference was, only that her dad, she was slowly beginning to think of Zane that way, was going to talk to a lot of people about her. Zane stepped up to the podium slowly. He wasn't wearing designer sunglasses or his usual leather jacket, just a dark shirt sleeves rolled up and a face that looked both determined and exhausted. He let the room quiet on its own before speaking. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice steady. "There's been a lot of speculation the past few days, and I think it's time I speak directly. The young girl you saw on stage, Abigail Cole, is my daughter." There were no gasps, no loud murmurs, just silence, pens, scribbling fingers typing rapidly. He let the pause hang for a second, then continued. "Her mother is Pearl Elliott. Some of you may remember her name from years ago. We were together once, and though our relationship didn't last in the public eye, it never truly ended in the ways that mattered. What kept us apart is not something I want to sensationalize today. But I will say, this race status and pressure broke something that should have never been broken." Pearl, sitting a few seats behind Abigail, held her breath. Hearing him speak that plainly, that publicly made her stomach tighten, but also stirred something like vindication. "I wasn't there when Abigail was born. I didn't even know she existed until recently. That's a regret I will carry with me for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The first question came quickly. A male reporter in the second row asked Zane, "Do you worry this will affect your career? Some fans may not react well. You've built a brand on being neutral, apolitical, focused only on music." Zane looked directly at him. "My daughter is not a political statement. She's a person, a beautiful, talented, brilliant person. And if being her father cost me record sales, sponsorships, or magazine covers, then those were never things I wanted to begin with." Another reporter followed up. "Pearl Elliott comes from a conservative family. Have they responded to your reunion?" Zane's expression darkened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "That's not for me to speak on. What I can say is that Pearl has carried more weight on her own than most people realize, and she did it with grace. I respect her more than I can ever fully explain." Pearl felt tears burn behind her eyes. She hadn't asked for any of this, and yet here it was, validation not whispered behind closed doors, but shouted in a room where the world could hear. A female journalist near the front raised her hand. "What do you say to people online who have already criticized your daughter's appearance, her background, and your choice to now bring this to the spotlight?" Zane exhaled slowly. He glanced at Abigail, who was watching him wide-eyed but calm. "I say this, love doesn't come in a color, and if you can't see the beauty in my daughter's voice because of the tone of her skin, then you never really heard me at all." There was a pause. Some reporters lowered their eyes, some nodded. One or two looked uncomfortable, but the message had landed firmly. After the formal questions ended, a few cameras were turned off, but the energy in the room remained tense. Pearl stood beside Zane as they posed for a single photo, arms gently around each other. Abigail was invited to join. She hesitated, then ran forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. Click, flash. It wasn't a perfect picture. Pearl's eyes were red. Zane's smile was small. Abigail's dress was wrinkled, but it was real. and in a world obsessed with images, real was more powerful than perfect. Later that night, as the clip of Zayn's speech circulated across networks and social media, comments flooded in, some supportive, many not. He ruined his legacy. Why drag a child into this? This is just PR spin. But under those quieter voices spoke up. I cried watching this. I've never seen a man stand like that for his family. This gives me hope. Pearl sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, watching it unfold in real time. Zayn sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, then turning it face down. Abigail lay on the floor, drawing headphones in, unaware of the storm outside their walls. Pearl broke the silence. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. The cameras, the scrutiny, the hate. Zayn turned toward her. Neither am I, but I'm ready to fight for us. That's what matters. She looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman who had to apologize for who she loved or what she had lost. She felt seen. He reached out, took her hand, and said, "This isn't the end of something. It's the start. We do it together, one step at a time." Pearl nodded. Together. And somewhere outside, beyond the noise and the headlines, the world kept spinning. But in that quiet living room, a new kind of family was beginning to stand still. Stronger, bolder, and finally, unapologetically whole. The night of the finals arrived with a weight that could be felt before anyone even stepped into the venue. Studio Horizon's main hall glowed under the lights of hundreds of bulbs, each spotlight casting a sense of grandeur across the wide stage. Rows of red velvet chairs filled quickly with guests, some dressed casually, others in their finest evening wear, each carrying their own expectations for what the evening would hold. A few came to support family, some came for entertainment, but many came out of curiosity to see the little girl from Edenbridge whose story had taken over their screens. Backstage, Abigail sat quietly in the dressing room, her feet swinging above the floor, wearing the same navy blue dress that Gloria had altered earlier that afternoon. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't new, but it was pressed clean and held together with care. A silver clip kept her hair pinned on one side, a small touch of sparkle that caught the light when she moved. In her lap rested a small lyric sheet, the corners folded from being read too many times. She didn't look nervous, but she didn't look calm either. She looked focused, as if she understood the weight of what she was about to do. Her parents, Zayn and Pearl, waited in the front row of the audience, close enough to be seen, but far enough to not intrude. The host came out first, warming up the crowd, with the ease of someone who had done this dozens of times before. He thanked the sponsors, acknowledged the judges, and introduced the night's final round. As each contestant performed, the energy shifted. Some sang flawlessly but lacked emotion. Others poured their hearts into the microphone but missed notes along the way. Every performer gave something different, but it was clear that the judges and audience alike were waiting for her. When the lights dimmed for Abigail's turn, a hush swept across the hall. The host didn't announce her with fanfare. He simply said, "Please welcome our youngest finalist, Abigail Cole." She walked onto the stage alone, small against the vast space, but not shrinking. She took her place at the center, looked out across the sea of faces, and gave a tiny nod to the sound engineer. Then she raised the microphone to her lips, voice soft but sure. "My parents wrote this song together," she said, "but I made it mine. It's about learning that you belong, even when the world tells you that you don't." There was no music at first, just her voice clear and round, singing the opening line. Then the piano joined in, gentle and steady, followed by a subtle string arrangement that added depth without overpowering her. The melody was familiar to anyone who had followed her story, but this version was new. She had rewritten the bridge to reflect her own experience. Her lyrics spoke of waiting, wondering, and the joy of finally being seen. Each note landed like a truth she had carried quietly for too long. Zayn sat forward in his seat, elbows on his knees, eyes never leaving his daughter. Pearl gripped his hand tightly, her breathing shallow but steady. They watched her command the stage, not with volume or bravado, but with honesty. It wasn't just a performance. It was a statement. When the final note faded and the lights held still for a second longer than expected, the room remained silent. Then slowly at first, the audience rose to their feet. The applause began with polite clapping but built into a standing ovation. Even the judges stood visibly moved. One dabbed her eyes discreetly with a tissue. Abigail curtsied slightly, then walked off stage, not smiling too wide, not looking for approval. She had done what she came to do. Backstage, Gloria hugged her tight. "You did it, baby girl. You sang like you were born on that stage." Abigail leaned into the embrace, her eyes damp, but not from nerves, just relief. An hour later, the results were announced. The host returned with an envelope in hand, tension rising like a string pulled taut. He began with the third-place winner, then the runner-up, neither of which was Abigail. Murmurs rose in the audience, some confused, some disappointed. Then the host continued, "We'd like to present a very special honor tonight. This award is not based on technical scores or competition rules. It's based on impact, on voice, on courage. The Inspiration Award goes to a young girl who reminded us all why music matters. Abigail Cole." Gasps filled the room, followed by a second wave of applause, this one louder and more spontaneous than the first. Abigail stepped up to receive the award, a glass plaque, and an educational scholarship to a prestigious arts program. She was also given a small grant to help cover her family's medical expenses, a detail quietly arranged by the organizers. As she held the plaque in her hands, she looked out into the crowd and saw Zane standing, his hands clapping slowly but firmly, his expression unreadable except for the gleam in his eyes. Pearl stood beside him, eyes shining with tears but smiling with pride. For Abigail, the moment was enough. It didn't need confetti or confessions. It was just enough to be there, to be seen, and to be heard. After the ceremony, as people gathered outside for photos and short interviews, Abigail stayed close to her parents. Some reporters tried to get her attention, asking questions about her experience, her background, even her thoughts on becoming a symbol. She answered politely when she could, but mostly she let Zane and Pearl speak for her. Zane told the press, "She didn't win because she's my daughter. She didn't win because she had a story. She won because she told the truth, and the truth always finds its voice." Later that night, back at Gloria's house, the living room was dim, lit only by a small lamp and the soft glow of Abigail's award sitting on the shelf. The family gathered around takeout containers, too tired to cook, too happy to care. Abigail lay on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her, her head resting on Pearl's lap. Zane stood by the window phone, buzzing with messages and calls he wasn't ready to answer. He looked at his daughter, then at Pearl, and felt something settle deep inside him. Not fame, not relief, just peace. Pearl ran her fingers through Abigail's curls, humming the chorus of the song she had sung. Abigail's eyes were closed, but her voice came out small and clear. "Do you think people liked it?" Zane turned, walked over, and knelt beside her. "I think they heard you, really heard you. And once people hear something that honest, they don't forget it." Abigail smiled, eyes still closed. "Then I'm glad I sang it." And with that, she drifted off to sleep, the sound of gentle breathing filling the room, the rhythm of a story finally turning toward light. The morning light filtered softly through the sheer curtains of Gloria's living room, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Pearl sat on the edge of the couch, a cup of warm tea in her hands. Fingers curled tightly around the mug, not for warmth, but for grounding. She had been up since before dawn, unable to sleep, mind restless from the aftermath of the performance night and everything it had set in motion. Abigail was still asleep in the adjoining room, curled up with her ribbon-wrapped award cradled against her chest. Zane had stepped out to take a call with his agent, but promised to return shortly. Pearl wasn't alone in the house, yet she had never felt more alone in her thoughts. Until Gloria came in from the porch and said simply, "They're here." Pearl looked up, heart tightening. She didn't need to ask who. She knew. She rose slowly, placing the cup on the side table with a slight tremble in her wrist. Her breath slowed, and she smoothed her cardigan as she walked toward the doorway. She had not seen her parents in over 6 years. Not since the night she stood in their living room, tear-stained and trembling, when her father gave her an ultimatum and her mother looked away. Now they stood in Gloria's entry hall, older, grayer, but unmistakably them. Her father in a wool coat too formal for the weather, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. Her mother clutching her handbag tightly in front of her, her eyes moving quickly between Pearl and the floor. Pearl, her father said first. The word hung in the air as if testing its weight after so long. She nodded slightly, arms still crossed. "Dad, Mom." Her mother's lips parted. "You look well." It was the kind of sentence people used when they didn't know what else to say. Pearl didn't reply. Her eyes flicked toward Gloria, who gave her a gentle nod and retreated to the kitchen, leaving the four of them, Pearl, her parents, and the silence in the room. No one moved for a moment. Then her father spoke again, this time slower. "We saw the broadcast. Your daughter. She was extraordinary." Pearl's expression didn't change. Her name is Abigail. Her mother blinked, nodding quickly. Yes, of course. Abigail. She's beautiful. She paused. She looks like you. And her father Pearl added, it wasn't a dig, it was a fact, one she wanted to make sure they acknowledged. There was a pause. Then her father stepped further into the room, his voice firmer but less rigid. We came to say we were wrong. About all of it. About him. About you. About her. Pearl's shoulders rose slightly, almost defensively. Now that the world's clapping, you want to clap too. He flinched. No, that's not why. We've had time to reflect. Watching her up there singing like that, knowing what she's overcome, it made me think about what we chose not to see, what we refused to understand. Her mother's voice broke slightly. I saw her smile on that stage, and all I could think was how many years we've missed. Birthdays, school plays, first words. We didn't just push you away. We pushed her away before she even had a chance. Pearl's hands fell to her sides. She wanted to scream, to cry, to tell them how much they had hurt her. But instead, she said quietly, you didn't just miss years. You missed the chance to know her before the spotlight. When she was scared, when she needed family, and only had one. Her mother looked like she might collapse under the weight of her own guilt. Her father, normally composed and stiff, rubbed a hand over his face and sat down on the edge of a nearby chair. We're not asking you to forget, he said. We're not even asking you to forgive us today. We just want to begin. Somewhere. Somehow. At that moment, footsteps padded softly down the hallway. Abigail had woken up and entered the room, quietly rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. Her curls were tousled from sleep, and her voice was still scratchy. Mom Pearl turned softening. It's okay, baby. Come here. Abigail approached, slowly stopping when she saw the two unfamiliar faces. She looked up at Pearl, confused. Who are they? Pearl knelt to her level, placing a hand gently on her back. These are your grandparents. They came to meet you. Abigail looked at them carefully. There was no immediate smile, no dramatic run into their arms. She tilted her head the way she always did when thinking, then said, Do they know about Daddy? Her father's eyes closed briefly. We do, he said. We know who he is. And we were wrong to judge him. We were wrong to judge you. All of you. Abigail's voice was quiet but firm. I don't like when people say mean things about my dad. We don't either, her mother whispered. Not anymore. Pearl stood her hand still on Abigail's shoulder. This is her house, her peace. If you want to be part of her life, it starts with respect. Her father nodded. We understand. Zane returned at that moment, pausing in the doorway. His eyes scanned the room, quickly noting the tension, the unfamiliar faces, the way Pearl stood between them and Abigail. He didn't say anything. He just stepped beside his daughter and rested a hand on her other shoulder. Pearl looked from one parent to the other. This is Zane. Zane extended a hand, not aggressively, but with quiet strength. Good morning. Her father stood. There was a pause, then he reached out and shook Zane's hand. Not tightly, not limply, just enough. Her mother offered a faint nod. I don't know what kind of relationship we can build, Pearl said, but Abigail deserves the choice. So we'll start slow, if that's what you really want. Her mother's voice cracked. It is. Her father looked at Abigail. Can we see you again sometime? Maybe bring a storybook. Abigail looked up at her mom, then at Zane, then gave the tiniest nod. Maybe, if the book's good. The room didn't erupt into tears or applause, but something shifted. A door opened not wide, but just enough for air to move through again. Later that day, as the grandparents left and the house settled into its usual rhythm, Zane turned to Pearl. You okay? Pearl nodded slowly. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but today, I didn't flinch. I didn't fold. I stood with my daughter, and I stood with you. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, That's more than enough. And as Abigail curled up beside them on the couch, flipping through a new book Zane had picked up for her, the quiet in the house wasn't the tense kind. It was the kind that comes after a storm, where nothing is perfect, but everything is finally beginning to feel possible. The soft evening glow spilled across the backyard, casting golden lines over the folding chairs and mismatched picnic tables that filled the space. It wasn't a grand venue or an elaborate party, but it was real streamers. Abigail had picked herself fluttered gently in the breeze, and the string lights Gloria had saved for special occasions gave the whole yard a warmth that wasn't just from the summer air. It was Abigail's birthday, and for once it wasn't overshadowed by hospital bills or unanswered questions. This time it was exactly what she deserved: family laughter and the quiet magic of being surrounded by people who truly saw her. Zane stood off to the side near the makeshift refreshment table watching as Abigail led a group of kids in a chaotic version of musical chairs. She was laughing, really laughing, and the sound of it settled something inside him. Pearl was just a few steps away chatting with Gloria and Pearl's mother, who had made it clear she was still learning, but had shown up anyway with a cake and a sincere smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Zane reached into his pocket, fingers curling around the small velvet box he had been carrying for over a week. He had rehearsed the words a dozen times in his head, but none of the versions had felt right. Still, tonight felt different. Not because it was a special occasion in the traditional sense, but because he finally believed they had survived the hardest parts, and what came next was theirs to shape. After the games were done and cake had been eaten, Abigail was busy opening cards and gifts, her face lighting up at every ribbon and bow. Zane caught Pearl's eye across the yard. She tilted her head, slightly curious, maybe sensing something in the way he was standing. He walked over slowly, nervous but steady. "Can I steal you for a second?" he asked. Pearl raised a brow. "Right now," he nodded. "It won't take long." She followed him to the quietest corner of the yard, away from the noise, but still in the reach of the string lights. Her expression softened as she looked at him. "You're doing the face again." "What face? The serious one word every 5 seconds face. What's going on?" Zane smiled, taking a breath. "I don't have a speech. I'm not going to sing or go down on one knee if it makes you uncomfortable. I wanted to say that after everything we've walked through alone then together, I don't want to keep building this in pieces. I want to call it what it is. A family. A life. With you." Pearl looked at him, the corners of her mouth twitching, her eyes blinking faster than normal. Zane opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond set in the center. "Will you marry me, Pearl? No drama, no pressure, just a real future the way we've earned it." She exhaled, her voice catching. "You didn't even let me prepare." He grinned. "That's part of the plan." Pearl looked at the ring, then at him. "Yes, of course, yes." Behind them, a small voice rang out. "Wait, did you just say yes?" Abigail ran over, eyes wide. Pearl laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I did." Abigail jumped in place, then threw her arms around both of them. "Does that mean I get to plan the wedding?" Zane and Pearl looked at each other, then nodded. "Sure does." Months passed with the rhythm of ordinary joy: doctor's appointments, school lunches, music rehearsals, grocery runs. The wedding was small, quiet, but beautiful. A ceremony held at the park where Zane and Pearl had first met during a music program so many years ago. Abigail stood proudly as the flower girl, walking ahead of her parents, like she'd known all along they'd end up there. And then, one spring morning, Pearl gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Zane was in the room the entire time, holding her hand, his forehead pressed to hers as she pushed through hours of labor. When the doctor finally announced their arrival, healthy, crying, squirming, Zane laughed through his tears. Pearl, exhausted and glowing with relief, reached out for her children, one in each arm, her smile as steady as her heartbeat. They named the boy Orion. Zane had suggested it, explaining that it came from the constellation that guided sailors, travelers, and dreamers. "He'll never have to hide in the dark," Zane had said. "He'll know exactly where he comes from, and he'll shine through it." Pearl had agreed immediately. The girl they named Irene. It was a name Pearl had always loved, rooted in the Greek word for peace. "She'll bring balance," Pearl said softly. "She'll be the calm after everything. Not because she needs to fix the past, but because she deserves to grow without its weight." Orion's skin was warm brown, a mirror of Zane's, while Irene's was lighter with Pearl's pale tone. But when Abigail, now 8, looked at them, she didn't see difference. She saw her siblings. She leaned in close one afternoon as they napped together, their tiny fingers touching, and whispered, "They don't look the same, but they feel the same. That's what matters." Zane had watched from the doorway, his heart stretching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The home they moved into was simple, a 1-story house near the edge of Edenbridge, close enough to town, but far enough to feel quiet. Gloria still visited, often bringing over food and wisdom, occasionally babysitting, while Zane and Pearl took long walks just to talk. Pearl's parents came 2 less often, still tentative, but every visit brought a little more warmth. There were nights after the twins had finally fallen asleep and Abigail was tucked into bed with her latest book half read on her chest, that Zane and Pearl would sit on the porch in silence, listening to the crickets and watching the stars. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but every moment felt full. And while the world beyond their fence still spun, loud, complicated, sometimes cruel, inside that house, there was something rare, not perfect, but real. Not always easy, but earned. The lake behind their home didn't glitter like something out of a postcard. It simply breathed slow and blue and honest, the way the sky touched it without effort, and the trees around it leaned in like they knew they belonged there. The house that sat a few dozen steps away wasn't big or new, but it was full of sound, of sunlight, of movement that made sense. Inside, the floor creaked in the places they'd all learned to step around. The kitchen always smelled a little like cinnamon or fried onions depending on the hour, and the living room had 2 baby swings, a worn sofa, and drawings taped to the wall with the kind of confidence only children had. Zane stood on the back porch, a baby monitor in one hand and a half-filled mug in the other. The sun was starting to drift lower, just enough to paint long shadows across the yard. Pearl was sitting in the grass with Abigail, their elbows touching, as they worked through a puzzle that Abigail insisted must be finished before dinner. Orion and Irene were asleep inside, finally, after an afternoon of high-pitched shrieks and gummy smiles, and a diaper emergency that had taken both parents to resolve. These were the moments Zane never saw coming years ago, when his life was packed in tour buses and hotel rooms, when family was a word he avoided because it felt like a responsibility he wasn't built for. But here now, he didn't feel like he was pretending. He felt settled. He felt enough. Pearl turned her head and caught him watching. She smiled, then held up one puzzle piece between her fingers like a question. He gave her a shrug and she laughed, shaking her head. That sound still got to him. It didn't matter how many times he heard it. There were years they lost where he forgot what it meant to have someone's laugh echo back and make the world feel smaller in a good way. He walked across the grass and sat next to them, one leg stretched, the other folded. Abigail looked up and pointed to a piece. "This one looks like it goes here, but it doesn't. I already tried it 6 times. Zane took the piece from her hand, turned it once, and gently pressed it into a different spot. It clicked perfectly into place. Abigail's eyes widened. "Okay, how did you do that?" Pearl raised a brow. "Experience. He's had to fit a lot of broken things back together." Zane chuckled. "Most of them were my fault too." They worked in silence for a few more minutes until Abigail asked, "Do you think the twins will like puzzles when they get older?" Pearl answered first. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll like building things from scratch instead of finishing what someone else started." Zane nodded. "Either way, they'll have a big sister who teaches them not to give up when the piece doesn't fit right away." Abigail smiled, her cheeks pink from the sun. "They already smile more when I hold them." "You're their favorite," Zane said. Pearl added, "You've always had a way of making people feel safe." The words landed softly. Abigail didn't say anything, but the way her shoulders lifted just a little told them everything. That she heard it, that she believed it, that she carried it like it meant something. Later that evening, after dinner and dishes and the 3rd reading of the same bedtime story, the babies finally fell asleep again, and Abigail was tucked in with her favorite blanket wrapped under her chin. Zane and Pearl sat outside with the baby monitor crackling softly beside them. The air was cooler now, the sky darker, and the lake was still. It was the kind of quiet that made room for reflection. Pearl leaned back in the wooden chair, her legs tucked under her. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Zane shook his head. "Not once. Not like this." She glanced at him, half a smile on her lips. "But you don't regret it." He turned toward her. "Pearl, if all I ever do in this life is be your husband and raise these kids with you, then that's more than enough for me. I chased a lot of things that didn't fill me. This fills every part." She reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, familiar. "I used to think I'd never forgive myself for what I let happen, for the time we lost. But when I look at them, Abigail, Orion, Irene, I don't feel regret anymore. I feel peace. Like we did something good out of everything that went wrong." Zane nodded. "We didn't get a perfect story, but we got a true one." They sat there for a long time, not saying much, just listening to the small sounds of home. The creak of a floorboard inside, the whisper of wind through trees, the rustle of blankets as one of the babies stirred and then settled again. Every sound belonged, every moment held weight. Inside, Abigail was still awake. She often stayed up late now, not in rebellion, but because her thoughts were bigger than they used to be. She had a notebook tucked under her pillow where she wrote short stories and little poems, most of them about family or songs, or people who lived in two worlds at once. She didn't always show them to anyone, but she knew they mattered. Tonight she wrote a single sentence. Even the hardest pieces find a place when you keep trying. She looked at it for a long time, then closed the notebook and smiled. The next morning came gently. Sunlight crept in through the windows and onto the floor, where Orion and Irene played side by side on a soft blanket. They reached for each other's hands without meaning to. Abigail crouched beside them and watched still in pajamas, her hair messy, her eyes thoughtful. "They're so different," she whispered. Pearl, who had just come in from the kitchen with coffee, asked. Different how Abigail thought for a moment. Their faces, their skin, their voices. But when they look at me, I feel the same love. I don't have to pick which one is more mine. They both are. Zane knelt beside her. "That's what we've been trying to say all along, baby. That family isn't about matching. It's about meaning." Pearl smiled, brushing a hand through Abigail's curls. "You're the heart of this house." You know that Abigail looked up. "Then I'll keep it beating." Outside the lake shimmered. The trees stood quiet, the air thick with a peace that had been earned. There was no grand closing moment, no audience to cheer, no spotlight. Just life, full, imperfect, and real. And for this family, that was more than enough.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.